The tendency to discriminate, to hate, and the tendency to empathize and to feel compassion for, to love, are both built in to the human psyche. Certainly, society can act to educate individuals and emphasize each of these tendencies. But the tendency to discriminate in a negative way, because discrimination can also be a good thing, to treat others different from yourself in a way that we like to think is abhorrent, is a very difficult process to effectuate, because human beings are resistant to change. Certainly some change occurs within a generation over time, but most change occurs with successive generations. But if you look at racism or sexism or any of these isms that separate us, they are essentially a psychological mechanism in which we look at others different from ourselves, and we look at ourselves in a preferential way. Now, is this a good or a bad thing? It's generally considered to be a bad thing because we could be on the receiving end, but it also could be a bad thing because collectively, as a species, humanity probably would do better to be able to cooperate and look at individuals as equals. When we say that we believe that all men, all people, the slaves weren't included, women weren't included, all men are created equal, we don't mean that they're equal literally. The translation is that everyone should be treated justly and fairly. They should be treated equally. Now, how do you make this come to be? Well, it's obvious that there has to be many, many different ways of achieving this. Certainly, the idea of segregating different individuals is a bad idea. Why is this? It's because human beings, if not exposed to others that are different in some way, skin color, religion, whatever, naturally tend to treat them as strange and frequently as a lower class of citizens. Now, some people won't. Some people will see beyond that because both tendencies are inherent in us, but most will. My mother, who grew up in Poland, saw Arnold Schwarzenegger for the first time and hated him because he had the physical features of a Polish farm boy who she never associated with, just saw them at a distance. And they were a different class of individuals. They were lower class. That's how they were treated. And so just because he had those physical characteristics, she was unable to get beyond that fact and look at him as an individual. So it was an immediate judgment. Class systems in Britain, for example, did the same thing. And dictators, even if benevolent, tend to see the folks that they are ruling over as inferior to them. And certainly there are selfish interests involved in being a dictator. It's hard to be a benevolent dictator for too long. It may not be absolute power, but it's pretty close. So what do? Well, one of the things that you can do is you can use shame to educate. If someone calls someone of a foreign race a macaca, and nobody hears about it, That's very different than if it gets on national TV. Now, the individual that says that word and means that slur may not actually feel shame. But by publicizing that and showing it to people, you do two things. The more superficial thing is you say, well, if you get caught doing that, the same thing is going to happen to you. You're going to be shunned. You're going to lose power. You're going to lose face. But hopefully it also shows something else, that we as a society find that type of behavior unacceptable. What else can we do? We can humanize people. Break those classes down. When you call somebody that is a Vietnamese a gook, you're trying to make it easier to kill them, because most people have a hard time killing other human beings. Not all. And by dehumanizing them, that process becomes easier. So this is just another example of how it works. By creating that word, you create this idea. So by showing others to be similar, to have loved ones, to have families, to have friends, to have jobs, when you do this, you break down those barriers. And all these things are being done. These are the things we need to continue to do. And it's a long, long process. When we call someone a gook, what we're doing is we're removing the idea that they're like us. And in a sense, empathy is said to be a selfless act, but it can also be looked at as seeing yourself in others. Now, you could say, well, that's not selfless because you're really by doing that, but it doesn't matter. That's what it's about, seeing yourself in others, projecting that they're like you. We need to educate, we need to promote, we need to shame. And then, let's get to perhaps the crux of this video, words. I think that the racial slurs are like landmines. And I saw on NPR, well, I actually heard it, a story, I think it was a village in Afghanistan where they had so many landmines that when the Americans came in to remove them, they were just going off. They were improvised, they were all different, they were everywhere, and we just could not defuse them. So what we did was we bombed the village entirely. Razed it. And then we're going to have to rebuild it. What's my point? My point is that there are some words that have gotten to the point where they're like that village. There are some words, racial slurs, that you can diffuse because there aren't so many, and they're landmines, and you know how they work. And this has been done. This is something we can do. But there are other cases where the infestation is so great, that explosive power is so great, that you either have to just leave the village or destroy the village. Well, I have more thoughts. So later, we'll talk about other things.